She walked past the bright signs promising everything for $1. She had seen promises before. She knew that cheap and worthwhile were not always the same thing. In 1963, she learned what most people are still figuring out today, that saving money and spending less are two entirely different things. In 2026, we tested her rules against the modern dollar store. What we found wasn't about prices at all. It was about something she understood that we had forgotten. Will the dollar store save you money, or will it cost you more in ways you haven't counted? The question of value. She understood that cheap and inexpensive were not the same thing. One meant low in quality, temporary, soon to be replaced. The other meant fairly priced for what it offered. She had learned to recognize the difference without needing to be taught. When she held something in her hand, she felt its weight and texture. She turned it over, examined the seams, tested the hinges if there were any. She was not suspicious by nature, but she was careful. Careful had become second nature to her over time. She knew that saving a few cents today could mean spending more next month. This was not a theory she had read somewhere. It was something she had observed in her own life repeatedly. She had bought the cheaper broom once, watched the bristles bend and fall out. She had replaced it with another cheap one, then another. Eventually, she spent more than if she had chosen differently from the start. After that, she stopped thinking of price alone. She began asking herself how long something would last. She began thinking about whether it would do what she needed it to do. She began considering whether she would need to replace it soon. These were not calculations written down on paper. They were quiet assessments made in the moment, standing in the aisle. She did not rush through these thoughts. Rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes led to waste. Waste felt wrong to her, almost physically uncomfortable. It was not about being frugal in a harsh way. It was about making choices that held up under use. She had come to understand that cheaper did not always mean better. Sometimes it meant the opposite. How she approached choices. Her decisions were slow, but not because she was indecisive. She was deliberate. She thought about what would happen after she brought something home. She thought about where it would go, how often it would be used. She thought about whether it would still be useful in a year. This kind of thinking was automatic for her. It was not burdensome or tiring. It was simply how she moved through the world. When she needed something, she did not buy it immediately. She waited to see if the need persisted. Sometimes the urgency faded, and she realized she did not need it after all. Other times the need remained, and she knew it was worth addressing. She kept a mental list of things that required attention. She did not write it down, but she remembered. She prioritized based on necessity, not desire. Desire was present, but it was not in charge. She had learned that wanting something was not the same as needing it. She had also learned that needing something did not mean buying the first version she saw. She compared options without making it a lengthy process. She looked at what was available, what it was made of, how it was constructed. She noticed small details that others might overlook. A handle that felt loose, a lid that did not quite fit. These were signs that something would not last. She avoided those items, even if they cost less. She understood that use revealed truth. Something that seemed fine in the store could fall apart at home. She had seen it happen too many times. So she chose carefully, with her future self in mind. She imagined herself using the item weeks or months from now. If she could picture it still working, still serving its purpose, she considered it. If she could not, she left it behind. This approach required patience, but she had plenty of that. Patience had become one of her most reliable tools. The modern test without drama. In 2026, the landscape had shifted in ways she would not have anticipated. Stores now offered abundance where there had once been scarcity. Choices multiplied, prices varied widely, and convenience became central. The dollar store had become a fixture, a place where everything seemed accessible. It promised simplicity, low cost, and quick solutions. She might have been curious about it in her own quiet way. She might have wondered if it aligned with her approach. Walking into such a store, she would have noticed the sheer volume immediately. Rows and rows of items, brightly packaged, stacked high. Everything marked at the same price or close to it. The uniformity would have been both appealing and disorienting. She would have picked things up, examined them as she always did. She would have felt the lightness of the plastic, the thinness of the material. She would have noticed that some items felt less substantial than what she was used to. This would not have angered her or disappointed her. It would simply have been information. She would have considered what she needed and whether these items could provide it. A storage container, perhaps, or a cleaning tool. She would have thought about how long she needed it to last. If the answer was a few months, the item might have been fine. If the answer was years, she might have hesitated. She would not have dismissed the store entirely. She would have recognized that different needs called for different solutions, but she would have remained attentive to quality, even here. She would have noticed which items felt sturdier, which seemed flimsy. She would have made distinctions that others might not bother with, because to her, every choice still mattered. The price being low did not erase the need for discernment. If anything, it required more. She would have walked the aisles slowly, not rushing toward any particular section. She would have observed how things were displayed, how they were packaged. She would have noticed the difference between items that were truly useful and items that simply filled space. Some things would have caught her attention for the right reasons. A simple tool that did one thing well, a container that closed securely and felt solid in her hands. These would have earned her consideration. Other items would have raised quiet concerns, scissors that felt loose at the joint, hangers that bent too easily under minimal pressure, towels that seemed thin enough to see through. She would have recognized these as temporary solutions at best. She would have understood that temporary solutions often became permanent problems, because once something failed, it needed replacing, and replacing meant another trip, another decision, another expenditure of time and attention. She would have thought about the hidden costs, the cost of returning to the store sooner than expected, the cost of dealing with something that broke mid-use, the cost of disappointment when an item did not perform as hoped. These costs did not appear on any receipt, but they accumulated quietly, affecting her sense of order and control. She would have compared what she saw in 2026 to what she remembered from decades earlier, not with nostalgia, but with clarity. She would have recognized that abundance created its own complications, that having more options did not always make choosing easier, that low prices could create the illusion of savings while masking hidden expenses. She would have understood that the dollar store served a purpose. For certain items, for certain moments, it offered genuine convenience, but she would not have mistaken convenience for value. She would not have assumed that accessible meant worthwhile. She would have maintained her careful approach even in this new environment, testing weight, examining construction, imagining future use. She would have trusted her instincts about what would last, and she would have walked away from anything that felt unreliable, regardless of price, because her standard was not cheapness, it was dependability, and dependability could not be manufactured quickly or sold for $1. What saved more than money? What she preserved was not always visible in a ledger. It was not something that could be tallied at the end of the month. She saved time by not needing to replace things constantly. She saved frustration by choosing items that worked as intended. She saved mental energy by trusting her own judgment. These savings were quiet, almost invisible. They did not announce themselves, but they accumulated over time, creating a kind of steadiness. She knew where everything was because she had chosen it intentionally. She knew how things worked because they were reliable. She did not have to adapt to constant failure or disappointment. Her environment reflected her decisions, and her decisions reflected her values. This created a sense of order that was deeply calming. It was not perfection. Things still broke, wore out, needed replacing, but the frequency was lower and the disruption was minimal. She had built a life where most things functioned as they should. This was not luck, it was the result of years of careful attention. She had learned to read the signs of durability. She had learned to separate marketing from reality. She had learned to wait when waiting was wise. And she had learned that the cheapest option often cost more in the end, not just in money, but in time, in peace, in reliability. She did not think of herself as particularly skilled or wise. She simply thought of herself as practical. But practicality, when practiced consistently, created stability. And stability was worth more than she could measure. It meant fewer surprises, fewer disruptions, fewer moments of chaos. It meant she could trust her surroundings to support her. This trust was not something she had to purchase repeatedly. It was something she had built, one choice at a time. She understood that her approach saved her from a particular kind of exhaustion. The exhaustion that comes from constantly managing failure, from dealing with things that break at inconvenient moments, from having to stop what she was doing to address something that should have worked. These interruptions were more costly than they appeared. They disrupted her rhythm, her focus, her sense of control. They created small moments of chaos that rippled outward. By choosing carefully from the start, she avoided most of these disruptions. Her days moved more smoothly because her tools and possessions were dependable. She did not have to think about them constantly. She did not have to wonder if something would hold up. She simply used what she had, and it performed as expected. This reliability created space in her mind for other things, for planning, for thinking, for attending to what actually mattered. She was not distracted by the constant need to fix or replace. She was not pulled away from her intentions by unexpected breakdowns. Her environment supported her rather than demanding attention. This was a form of wealth that had nothing to do with abundance. It was wealth measured in steadiness, in predictability, in peace. She had also saved herself from the weight of regret. Regret over buying something that did not last. Regret over wasting resources on items that failed quickly. Regret over choices made in haste or without sufficient thought. She had made mistakes before, and she remembered them, but she had learned from them, and they informed her decisions going forward. This meant she rarely repeated the same error twice. She rarely found herself in the position of wishing she had chosen differently, and when she did experience disappointment, it was the exception rather than the rule. Her track record gave her confidence in her own judgment. She trusted herself to choose well because she usually did. This self-trust was another form of savings. It meant she did not second-guess herself endlessly. She did not agonize over decisions long after they were made. She chose, and then she moved forward, secure in the knowledge that she had chosen carefully. This confidence allowed her to act decisively when action was needed. It freed her from the paralysis of doubt. It gave her a kind of internal stability that matched the external stability of her surroundings. What she had built was not just a collection of reliable possessions. It was a way of being in the world that minimized friction and maximized calm, a way of living that respected her own time, energy, and peace of mind. The question of whether the dollar store is still cheaper is not as simple as it appears. Cheaper than what, and for how long, and at what cost beyond money? She would have understood that price is only one part of the equation, that value includes durability, reliability, and peace of mind, that saving money today means nothing if you spend it again tomorrow. She would have approached the test with the same calm she brought to everything else. She would have observed, considered, and chosen based on her understanding of use. She would not have dismissed modern convenience, but she would not have been swept up in it either. She would have remained grounded in her own experience. In 2026, with all its options and promises, her approach would still hold, not because it was old-fashioned, but because it was rooted in reality. She understood that the real test was not about price. It was about whether something served its purpose over time, whether it held up under the weight of daily life, whether it contributed to stability or undermined it. These were the questions she would have asked, and these are the questions that remain, regardless of the year. The dollar store may offer low prices, but low prices are not the same as value. Value requires consideration, patience, and a willingness to think beyond the moment. She knew this not because she was taught it, but because she lived it. And in living it, she discovered something that cannot be advertised or sold. That the cheapest option is rarely the one that saves you the most. That true economy is found not in the price tag, but in the choice. Her way of thinking was not about deprivation or hardship. It was about clarity. Clarity about what mattered and what did not. Clarity about the difference between need and want. Clarity about the true cost of things, measured not just in currency, but in consequence. This clarity gave her freedom, the freedom to make decisions that aligned with her values, the freedom to build a life that felt coherent and intentional, the freedom to avoid the endless cycle of buying, replacing, and regretting. She was not interested in accumulation. She was interested in sufficiency, in having what she needed in forms that lasted, in ways that made sense. This approach required nothing extraordinary. It required only attention, patience, and a willingness to think ahead. These were ordinary qualities available to anyone, but they had become less common over time. The culture had shifted toward speed, toward convenience, toward the immediate, toward solutions that promised ease but often delivered complications. She would have recognized this shift without condemning it. She would have understood that every generation faces its own challenges, that what worked for her might not work for everyone. But she would also have known that certain principles transcend time, that quality still matters, that durability still saves resources, that thoughtful choices still lead to better outcomes than impulsive ones. The test in 2026 would not have changed her mind. It would have confirmed what she already knew, that cheap and worthwhile are not synonyms, that saving money requires looking beyond the price at the moment of purchase, that the things we choose shape the life we live. She would have walked out of the dollar store with very little, not because she was judgmental or rigid, but because her standards were clear, and most of what she saw did not meet them. She would not have felt deprived by this. She would have felt relieved. Relieved to avoid bringing home items that would fail, relieved to save herself the future frustration and expense, relieved to maintain the order and reliability she had worked to create. In the end, the question was never really about the dollar store. It was about how we understand value, about whether we measure savings in the short term or the long term, about whether we prioritize convenience or consequence. She had answered these questions decades ago, not with words, but with a lifetime of choices, choices that reflected a deep understanding of what it means to live carefully, to live with intention, to live in a way that honors both resources and peace. The dollar store will always exist in one form or another. Places that promise low prices will always attract attention, but the question she would ask remains unchanged. Is it cheaper if it does not last? Is it savings if you have to buy it again? Is it value if it costs you more than money? These are not rhetorical questions, they are practical ones, and the answers, if we are honest, are already clear.